I like this question. At the same time, I worry it's the wrong question. I'm really, really drawn to the late, great Gene Annion's work when I get asked questions like this, right? And so one of the things that Annion would argue is that we look at education backwards. We tend to look at education as causal. That is, because of relative success or failure in education, it has produced this particular class outcome for this person as an adult. And the numbers on this would actually make that the exact inverse. More or less, you tell me the social class and your mom's educational attainment, and I can tell you within 95% predictability what you will attain educationally. In other words, we should more think about education as an effect of social class more than a cause. And then we have this great crisis in urban education of so few folks have access. The rough number locally in our city here in Memphis is about 40% of families didn't have reliable access to the internet. Having a laptop is kind of meaningless if you don't have access to the internet in terms of remote instruction and remote learning. Why is it that folks don't have access to these things? I think there's a really pernicious, and I would argue white supremacist argument that, well, it's because these parents are making bad decisions, right? They're choosing to have cell phones and cars, and they're buying cigarettes and beer and all of these things instead of paying for the resources that would support their children's education. To me, that misses the mark almost completely. So a lack of access to the internet, a lack of access to computer resources is going to be indicative of larger kinds of systemic and structural oppressions. So it's the very same people who struggle to access the internet that struggle to access healthcare, that struggle to access meaningful city infrastructure, that struggle to access jobs that are close enough that they can actually get to them and get back, that struggle to access childcare, so on and so forth. For me, this is so much evidence of the problem that is as old as this nation and even older. You know, if it were only a technology gap, what a better world we would live in.
Now, does this issue exacerbate what was already the problem that Zach describes? And I think in some ways it does. The children, as I watch people here in the Denver suburbs scramble to do the hybrid thing or the remote thing, they're forming pods. They're hiring their own part-time instructors to supervise the kids, to keep them on task while they're doing education at home. A lot of the parents work remotely because they have high-tech jobs or professional jobs that allow them to at least be in the same house, and they can keep some eye on their kids and so on during the day. Those are all privileges. Those are privileges that low-income families do not have. So it's not just they don't have Wi-Fi hookups. They don't have anybody look after the kids when they're working, not two jobs or whatever. So the hybrid really kind of falls apart. There's no national child care system. So you really make it that much more difficult for children of low-income parents, right? In the classroom, one of the things that would make this whole educational transition to COVID classroom better is if you had aides for the teachers. You have a primary teacher, you have another teacher that's doing the hand washing and making sure the kids have the masks, and in trying to do a little more individualization. We know school districts are cutting back right now because the revenues aren't there. They're getting some federal help and so on to do the hygiene stuff. But the hygiene stuff is just a small piece of this, right? To really try to replicate what they had before, they should have more teachers. And then if you go all online, the idea is, and I just saw in the paper today, there's a county in Colorado, Mesa County. Some of their online classes have 300 children. Because it's online, right? We don't have to pack them in a building. We don't have to have a chair for all of them. We don't have to have a locker. So we'll just have them all tune into to the happy teacher at 8 o'clock in the morning and follow it for 6 hours. These kids need a whole lot more attention than that. And I think right now, if you're going to go to all online, the classes should be smaller. Having taught a couple of classes, I think trying to do a gallery view of more than 15, 20 kids is not going to get it. And at the lower schools level, it's got to be even smaller than that. Should be about 10 kids. That means more teachers, more aides. And if you don't have that, then I think the poor kids are even at more of a disadvantage than the wealthier kids. Lots of folks predicted that preference for remote was going to be just the opposite of what it was. They're like, well, you know, poor families, minority families are going to want to get their kids back in the classroom. Parents have to work. They may not have good Wi-Fi. No, just the opposite. Low-income students of color, their parents are like, no, I'm not sending my kid into that Petri dish because we already know people of color are dying disproportionately from this disease. And we're not convinced that the schools are going to do what they need to do to keep our kids safe. For low-income families, this is a scary situation. And they know that their kids would be better off in school, but they're not willing to throw that dice because they know the challenge that their schools are going to have to come up to the standards that would really be necessary. 45% of the American population have underlying conditions. And if you figure that that's probably skewed by poverty as well, so it's probably a majority of the people that are low income have an underlying condition, and this includes their children. They have diabetes, they have asthma, they have, you know, heart issues and whatever. And so, you know, the risk of in-person education isn't the same for everybody. And it's a lot higher than we're pretending that it is.
Absolutely.